candidly.
Kia ora, everybody, and howdy. My name is Billy Osteen. I'm from the University of Canterbury. Have lived here for 15 years, and I'm going to wade into some dangerous territory of presuming that I can observe and comment on Kiwi leadership. So, as I talk about some of my experiences around this within the past 10 years, I want you to think about the word glocal, because I think it's a really nice sort of model for how folks have responded here over the past 10 years. So this is my house on September the 4th, 2010, about 7 a.m. in the morning. And it was my first sort of walk around the house to see what had happened. And so as you can see, this column of chimney is totally offset. And one of the problems with that is that my neighbor had a boat parked right underneath it. And so I was sort of out looking at it and wondering, who do I call? How do I get this fixed? What do I do? And my neighbor, who's a Kiwi builder, came walking by and he's like, mate, that's got to come down. And I'm like, you mean we're going to get up and do that? He's like, absolutely. So we got up, and it was quite easy to take down because the chimney had not been reinforced since the 40s when it was built. And while we were standing on our roof, we noticed the chimneys on just about every other roof down the street were in the same condition. And he said, we've got some work to do. So we picked up another guy, and we spent the rest of the day going to houses, even when people weren't there, which was freaking me out as an American, thinking about liabilities and insurance and lawsuits and all this stuff. And we took chimneys down all down the street. And it felt really good, because I'm a doctor, but not the real kind, right? So I can't really help people out in an immediate situation. I can philosophize about it, and we can think about it, and we can analyze it, but I can't really do anything useful. So this felt great. And by the end of the day, I was kind of like looking for more stuff to do. And I wasn't finding it. And as Leanne said, one of our students, Sam Johnson, made several phone calls. He made one phone call that he never got returned about showing up to help volunteer. And he said, to heck with this. I'm going to set up a Facebook page. And on the Tuesday after the earthquake, which was Saturday morning, on the Tuesday, he had about 100 students show up. And they went out to Halswell, and they had no boots, no gloves, no mask, no shovels, no wheelbarrows, nothing. They just showed up out there, and I think the Halswell people sort of took pity on them, and they said, well, sure, you can help us. Here's our little kid's sand bucket that you can move the liquefaction, and you can do this and that. So they were woefully unprepared. He reposted it. He did a bit of homework that night, so he got some supplies, reposted it, about 200 students showed up. Kept reposting it and got to about 1,000 students by the end of that week. And he was like, I've found something here. We've tapped into something. They got up to 2,200 students by the end of that first deployment for the September earthquake. And at the time, I kind of saw this and I thought, there needs to be a way for us to connect what these students are doing out in the community with what they do inside the university. But as you might recall, if you lived here during that time, we kind of thought we dodged the bullet, nobody died. That was the big one. We weren't going to have to deal with earthquakes anymore, right? So the students carried on, and they formed a club that was launching on the day of the February earthquake, because that was our second day of the semester. So they were going to have a club where they would go out and they would do volunteering. So they sort of went into sort of hiding for a day, February 23rd, and then they came out strong on February 24th and said, we're going to go after this in a big way. So they were out doing their thing. My family and I had escaped, basically, because our house was not inhabitable in Sumner. So we left, and we got up to Hanmer Springs. And I was watching the news, and they showed an image like this. And the news anchor said, isn't it great that these students have put aside their learning to help out the community? And my wife kind of looked at me, and she's like, that doesn't really sit well with you, does it? And I was like, hell no, it doesn't. So similar to the link creation story, which was an email late at night, I sent an email very hastily to the second person in control of the University of Canterbury. I said, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I think I want to figure out a way to bring the Student Volunteer Army back onto campus and back into our classrooms. So he gave me 24 hours before I was going to have a Skype call with the then Vice Chancellor Rod Carr. And he said, get your stuff together and figure out how you're going to do this. Does anybody know where this is? New Orleans, or Nolans, as you would say down there. So this is New Orleans, 2005, Hurricane Katrina. devastated the city. There's a university in the heart of the city called Tulane University. It's a pretty small university, about 6,000 students, totally private, so they don't get much government money. And they had to shut their doors when this happened. And they said, we will reopen in 6 months. We hope you come back, because if you don't come back, the students, if they don't come back, they would stay shut. So in the 6 months before they reopened their doors, they said, you know what? We need to be full-fledged partners for the rebuild of New Orleans. We need to devote as much resource as we can to help New Orleans survive, because that's going to help Tulane survive. So they created a graduation requirement that had students take 2 classes that were related to the rebuild of New Orleans before they could graduate. And so it forced the staff members to come up with classes all across every discipline to figure out how they were going to make this happen. So I was aware of this, and sort of the good news story of this is their enrollment dipped for 2 years following the hurricane. By 2009, they had the most applications for entrance of any university, bar none, in the United States. More than Harvard, more than Stanford, more than Yale. They had 45,000 people trying to get into 1,500 places. And they directly attribute it to the fact that they were telling students, hey, if you come to Tulane, you're going to get a really good education, but you're also going to roll up your sleeves and you're going to help us rebuild the city. So that was sort of my grand scheme thought. And I pitched it to the vice chancellor, and he listened for about 30 seconds and he said, done. Make something like that happen here. He liked the 45,000 application idea, right? So in the midst of this was sort of my observation of living in New Zealand since 2005. And the thing that I was really impressed and surprised about was how dependent we are as a country on volunteers to run basic services, right? We turn over the running of our schools to volunteers. We turn over most of our fire brigade to volunteers. We turn over most of our surf lifesaving to volunteers, right? So if any of these folks in these categories stop showing up and stop putting their hand up to do this, we are really stuffed. So that was another sort of thought in my head. And for me, this exemplifies 2 really good quotes that I heard about New Zealand when I first moved here. One was by Sir Peter Jackson, and he said, New Zealand is not a small country, it's a large village. This is a village, right? This is beyond being a country. This is a village. And then the other, a bit more off-color quote from Peter Hillary, Sir Edmund's son, he said, New Zealand is too small of a place to be an asshole, right? So you can't cross people in New Zealand because you're going to have to deal with them at some point, right? That is this, okay? So mash this stuff together with my sort of guiding aim of education. And my guiding aim of education is by the ancient Greeks, so a long time ago. And they basically believed that every one of us was born an idiot. So the Greek word idios means somebody concerned with themselves. So everybody's born an idiot. We're all concerned with ourselves, and it's only through education that you become a citizen. It's only through education that you become one of these folks who are putting their hands up to do these jobs. So for me as a teacher in New Zealand, I thought that's a really important thing to think about. You know, that's something that we should take on within our system. So I came up with this model. I didn't come up with the model. I came up with adapting it for here. Whoops. Yep. And so basically when we started the class, Christchurch 101, Rebuilding Christchurch, we gave the Student Volunteer Army members who wanted to take it, they didn't have to, it was an elective, we gave them 1/3 of the class having been completed. So they'd already been out doing all that service. So in order to make it a class, we were going to give them some academic content about volunteering and about citizenship, and then we were going to have them reflect on the connection points between this and what did they learn from this. So we started out that class in the second part of 2011. We've offered it every year since then, and now we do the service inside the class. So here's what a couple of service projects look like. So this is Fakata House, which is the child and family mental health facility just right down on Montreal Street. And they had a pretty dismal waiting room. And they got in touch with us and they said, hey, would your students want to come help us fix this waiting room up? Would they want us to help paint or decorate or do whatever? So we gave the students a little bit of a budget, and they revamped the waiting room. And we just heard feedback, that was a year ago. We just heard feedback yesterday, because some students are doing another project there, that this has transformed the way kids come into this facility. They look forward to it, because it has toys and a guitar and a whiteboard and all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool. Another sort of garden variety, pun intended, exercise that we do is with a number of community gardens around. So this is the Rickerton West Community Garden. We helped create that garden back in 2012, and we've been back every semester since then. So this is some of the service that we do, and then we have students reflect on that service and then think about it through academic content. This was a great project we did at Ilam Retirement Village. It was a pen pal morning tea. So the university students wrote letters, and they exchanged letters with some of the residents, and then we had a morning tea and we played games and just had a grand old time. So thinking about ripple effects, right? So these projects are all fine and dandy. They're pretty nice projects. They're not really life and death, any of that kind of stuff. They're enhancing. They're not sort of this really edgy stuff. In 2014, so we have a lot of US study abroad students take our class, because this kind of course is familiar to them, where you come and you do volunteering during the class and you reflect on it. So we had a student take the class in the first part of 2014. She was from Illinois, and when she left, she'd gotten to meet a couple of the Student Volunteer Army founders. She was really fired up to go back to her university and start a Student Volunteer Army. So she gets back to her university in September. This is early November. This is a F5 tornado, which is the biggest tornado that can land, blows through her hometown of Washington, Illinois, and leaves it looking like this. So pretty brutal. So she was about 2 hours away at the university, and she immediately went into action. And she made contacts with all the people all the students that she knew, and she said, hey, we really need to do something for my hometown. And she did what's called a fill the truck campaign. So they gathered necessary supplies, and they filled up 2 tractor trailers. And she generously credits her ability to do this to the class, but more so to being exposed to the Student Volunteer Army and seeing that as a young person, you can make a huge difference, right? So this is sort of the ripple, the glocal kind of notion about this, okay? So this was Illinois. This is a shameless plug for me advising Prince Harry to leave the royal family. He finally took the advice a couple of years later. But Prince Harry was coming to Christchurch, and through the folks at City Council who helped organize those trips, one of the people got in touch with me and they said, would you like to have 2 hours of Prince Harry's time? And I said, heck yeah, we definitely do. And she said, I think he'll be very interested in talking to the students, the Student Volunteer Army, finding out what you all have been up to. And he was absolutely just on spot. He had done research before, asked really good questions. He was on to it. So it really made me think that's pretty cool that, you know, as people want to call it, little old New Zealand, you know, has something that the Prince was quite impressed about. This was another visitor that we've had twice, actually. And through contacts with Jane Goodall's foundation, she has spoke at local schools, she's met with our university students, and again, she's doing this because she's aware of some of the things that these students have been doing, which is quite cool. And then you might not know the person in the center, but you probably know her brother. So this is President Obama's sister, and her name is Maya Sotoro, and she's an academic at the University of Hawaii and specializes in climate justice. And so Leanne was great to host her for a lunch, and we had young leaders there, and they all got to talk to her and engage with her, and then she did a workshop. Again, really cool connections that we've got now with other places who are interested in the responsive and the resilient leadership that we've developed here. And then finally, this will be another shout out to Leanne, but this is a group of students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. So this was in June of 2018. In February of 2018, a gunman, one of the former students, went onto their campus and killed 17 of their fellow students and teachers. And through a couple of mutual connections in sort of the way New Zealand networking works, we organized 28 of these students who had been organizing these amazing marches and this incredible stuff to come spend a week with us. And we had them paired up with the Student Volunteer Army, and they came out with this just amazing sort of manifesto about youth-led leadership and just really cool stuff. And here's Leanne with a UC student and with a Parkland student. Really, one of the more poignant sort of experiences I've had in my life was to host these folks. And then 6 months later, they hosted us. So we got to go visit Parkland, Florida. And the cool thing about this picture is this is the main courtyard where students enter and exit the campus at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. And a number of the Parkland students told us this saying up on the wall actually meant something to them. Like, it wasn't just wallpaper. It had actually become who they were and led them to be the incredible leaders that they became. So, thank you.